They found the way out, the escape hatch, the trick that makes $37 trillion in debt disappear. Not through taxes, not through cuts, not through default, through something else. Something that's never been tried before. Something that sounds impossible until you understand how it actually works. Bitcoin, gold, and a financial sleight of hand so clever that by the time you realize what happened, it'll be too late to stop it. Here's what's happening right now, behind closed doors, in meetings that aren't publicized, between people whose names you'll never hear. The United States government is quietly preparing to revalue gold and nationalize Bitcoin, not tomorrow, not next year, but soon. And when they do, $37 trillion in debt becomes manageable, payable, gone. But here's the cost. Every dollar you hold becomes worth less. Every savings account gets diluted. Every pension gets devalued. Your purchasing power, transferred. To pay for debt you never agreed to take on. This isn't theory, it's already happened. In 1933, the US government confiscated private gold, revalued it overnight, from $20 per ounce to $35, a 75% devaluation of the dollar, instant debt reduction. And citizens couldn't stop it, because by the time they understood what was happening, their gold was already gone. Now they're planning to do it again, but bigger, with gold and Bitcoin, creating what insiders call digital gold standard, a system where the government controls both traditional store of value and digital store of value, where they can revalue both simultaneously, where $37 trillion in debt becomes solvable. The legislation is being drafted. The executive orders are being prepared. The infrastructure is being built, and no one's talking about it. Because if people knew, they'd panic, they'd move money, they'd protect assets, they'd resist. So it's being done quietly, incrementally, through boring regulatory changes and technical adjustments that don't make headlines. Until one day, it's complete, and your wealth has been transferred to pay for a debt crisis you didn't create. This is the story of the greatest wealth transfer in history, the crypto gold trick, and why Washington is hiding it until it's too late for you to escape. To understand what's coming, you need to understand how governments actually solve debt crises. Because they don't solve them, they transfer them, from government to citizens, from public debt to private loss. There are only 4 ways to deal with sovereign debt. Option 1, pay it back, through economic growth and taxation. This is the honest way. But it's slow, painful, politically unpopular, and with $37 trillion in debt growing by $2 trillion per year, mathematically impossible. The US would need decades of surpluses, which hasn't happened since the Clinton administration, and won't happen again. Option 2, default, just refuse to pay, declare bankruptcy. This is what Argentina did, what Greece almost did, what Russia did in 1998. But for the US, it's unthinkable. The dollar is the global reserve currency. US Treasury bonds are considered the safest asset in the world. Default would destroy that, collapse the global financial system, trigger depression. Not an option. Option 3, inflate, print money, devalue the currency, make the debt worth less in real terms. This is the traditional method. Rome did it, Germany did it, Zimbabwe did it. The US has been doing it slowly for 50 years. But there's a limit. Inflation too fast causes hyperinflation, currency collapse, economic chaos. And the Federal Reserve is already at that limit. They can't print much more without triggering crisis. Option 4, the trick. Revalue assets the government owns. Change the price of gold. Confiscate Bitcoin. Create instant wealth on the government balance sheet. Use that wealth to reduce debt. This is what happened in 1933. And what's being planned now? Here's how it worked in 1933. The US was on the gold standard. Dollars were backed by gold. Citizens could exchange dollars for gold at $20.67 per ounce. That was the fixed rate, set by law. The government had a problem. The Great Depression, massive debt, deflation, economic collapse. They needed to inflate, to print money, to stimulate the economy. But they couldn't, because they were constrained by gold. If they printed too much, people would exchange dollars for gold. The gold would leave. The dollar would collapse. So they did something brilliant. and terrifying. Executive Order 6102, signed by Franklin Roosevelt on April 5, 1933. It made private gold ownership illegal. Citizens had to turn in their gold to the government. They received dollars at the official rate, 20.67 per ounce. Once the government had the gold, they changed the price, revalued it to $35 per ounce. Overnight, a 69% increase, which meant the dollar had been devalued by 41%. Every dollar citizens held was suddenly worth less. Every debt was suddenly easier to pay. But here's the key. The government owned the gold, so when they revalued it, they captured the gain. Their balance sheet improved. The debt burden decreased, and citizens bore the cost through devaluation, through loss of purchasing power, through involuntary wealth transfer. It worked. The economy recovered, the debt became manageable, and the government learned something valuable. That you can solve debt crises by transferring wealth from citizens to government. As long as you control the asset being revalued, as long as you do it quickly enough that people can't escape, as long as you make it look like economic policy instead of confiscation. Now they're planning to do it again, but this time, with gold and Bitcoin. The plan is already in motion, quietly, through 3 parallel tracks that most people aren't connecting. But when you see them together, the pattern is obvious. Track 1. Gold revaluation. The US government holds 8,000 metric tons of gold, officially valued at $42 per ounce. That's the accounting price, set in 1973. Never updated, but the market price is $2,600. The difference? Massive. At $42 per ounce, US gold reserves are worth $11 billion. At market price, $670 billion. A 60-fold difference, sitting on the Treasury's balance sheet, waiting to be revalued. And here's what insiders know. There's been quiet discussion in DC about marking gold to market, revaluing it to current prices. It sounds like boring accounting, but it's not. It's instant wealth creation. $660 billion appears on the government balance sheet. Debt-to-asset ratio improves. Borrowing capacity increases. But that's just the beginning. Because once gold is marked to market at $2,600, what stops them from revaluing it higher? To $5,000? To $10,000? They control the accounting. They set the price. And every dollar increase is a dollar of government wealth created from nothing. This was proposed in 2020, and 2021, and 2023 by serious people. Former Treasury officials, economic advisors. The conversation keeps happening, behind closed doors, in papers that don't make mainstream news. But the infrastructure is being built. Track 2. Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. In 2024, something strange started happening. US senators began proposing Bitcoin Strategic Reserve legislation. Not fringe politicians, mainstream lawmakers, suggesting the government should buy Bitcoin, hold it like gold, as a national asset. Senator Cynthia Lummis introduced the Bitcoin Act, proposing the US government acquire 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years. At current prices, that's $60 billion, a massive purchase. That would make the US government the largest Bitcoin holder in the world. Why? Officially, to secure America's financial future, to compete with other nations accumulating Bitcoin. But look deeper. If the government owns Bitcoin, and Bitcoin appreciates, the government captures that gain, just like with gold. But here's where it gets darker. What happens when the government decides to make Bitcoin legal tender? Mandatory for certain transactions? Required for international settlement? The value would explode, from 60,000 to 600,000, to 6 million. And the government would own 1 million coins. Trillion-dollar wealth creation, from appreciation of an asset they forced people to use. This sounds crazy until you realize it's already happening. El Salvador did it. Made Bitcoin legal tender. Forced adoption. The IMF objected. But El Salvador's debt became easier to service, because their Bitcoin holdings appreciated. Small scale, but proof of concept. Now imagine the US doing it, with the world's largest economy, with the dollar's reserve status, with the ability to make Bitcoin systemically important through regulation. The wealth creation potential is astronomical. Track 3. crypto regulation and control. While senators propose Bitcoin reserves, other agencies are doing something else. Building control infrastructure. The SEC is attacking crypto exchanges. The IRS is demanding transaction reporting. The Treasury is proposing stablecoin regulations. Banks are being instructed to surveil crypto transactions. This isn't random enforcement. It's preparation for control. Because if the government is going to nationalize Bitcoin, they need to know where it is, who owns it, how to access it. Executive Order 6102 worked in 1933 because gold was physical. People stored it in banks. The government knew where it was, could seize it. But Bitcoin is digital, stored in wallets, potentially anywhere, potentially anonymous, much harder to confiscate, unless you force Bitcoin into regulated infrastructure, require exchanges to report holdings, mandate KYC for all transactions, ban self-custody wallets, make Bitcoin regulated and controlled before you nationalize it. That's what's happening. Every regulatory action, every enforcement, every restriction is building the control framework so that when the order comes, compliance is automatic, resistance is impossible, and confiscation is complete. But most people don't see it because it's happening slowly through boring regulatory announcements, technical rule changes, enforcement actions that seem random, until you realize they're preparing for the crypto gold trick, the greatest wealth transfer in history. The trigger will come during a crisis. It always does. Because during crisis, people accept what they'd normally resist. They want government to act, to do something, anything, even if that something transfers their wealth. 1933 happened during the Depression. Crisis provided cover, made confiscation seem necessary, patriotic even. Citizens turned in gold to help the nation, not understanding they were enabling their own devaluation. The next crisis is coming. Maybe debt crisis. When interest payments exceed tax revenue, when the government can't roll over bonds, when default becomes imminent, or inflation crisis, when currency loses value faster than wages increase, when savings evaporate, when people panic, or financial crisis, when banks fail, when stocks crash, when people demand government intervention, when do something becomes the overwhelming sentiment. That's when it happens. When resistance is lowest, when alternatives seem worse, when people are scared enough to accept anything. The executive order is probably already drafted, sitting in a drawer, waiting for the right moment, the right crisis, the right political environment. And when that moment comes, it'll happen fast. Announced on a Friday night, effective immediately, before markets can react, before people can move assets, before resistance can organize. Here's what it might look like. Executive order declaring economic emergency, nationalizing Bitcoin above certain thresholds, requiring surrender to government within 30 days, in exchange for dollar credit at fair market value, which the government defines. Simultaneous revaluation of government-held gold to $10,000 per ounce. Instant balance sheet improvement. Debt crisis. Solved. Citizens will protest. Some will refuse, but compliance will be enforced. Through civil penalties, criminal charges, tax audits, asset freezes. The same methods used in 1933. The same methods that worked then. That will work now. And most people will comply. Because they're scared, because they trust authority, because resistance seems futile, because they don't understand what's happening until it's over, until their wealth has been transferred, until the debt crisis has been solved, at their expense. But here's what keeps some insiders awake at night. What if it doesn't work? What if people resist? What if they move assets offshore, convert to physical gold, use decentralized crypto wallets? What if compliance is incomplete? Then the government escalates. Capital controls, restrictions on international transfers, mandatory exchange rates, black markets emerge, economic distortion. The cure becomes worse than the disease. Venezuela, Argentina, Zimbabwe. The US doesn't want to become that, but the debt crisis might force choices that lead there anyway. Let me tell you about James Rickards. He's a financial lawyer, former Pentagon consultant. expert on financial warfare. And he's been warning about this for a decade. Rickards wrote a book in 2011 called Currency Wars. In it, he detailed a Pentagon war game he participated in, where the scenario was financial collapse, economic warfare, currency crisis. The game explored how nations would respond, what weapons they'd use, what strategies would work. One scenario they tested: the US government confiscating gold and Bitcoin, revaluing both, using the wealth creation to stabilize the dollar. The game concluded it was not only possible, but likely. In a severe crisis, when conventional options are exhausted, when the alternative is collapse. Rickards has been warning ever since that this scenario isn't theoretical, that the legal framework exists, that Executive Order 6102 was never repealed, that the government still has authority to confiscate gold during economic emergency, and that Bitcoin could be included through executive interpretation or quick legislation during crisis. Most people dismissed him: conspiracy theorist, alarmist, fearmongerer. But then 2020 happened. The government shut down the economy, printed $6 trillion, seized control in ways unimaginable before, and people realized Rickards was right. The government can do things during crisis that seem impossible during normal times. Now Rickards warns the crypto gold trick is coming, within years, maybe sooner, depending on crisis timing. And he's not alone. Other financial experts are seeing the same signs, the same preparation, the same inevitability. But there's someone else whose story matters. A government economist. Let's call him Thomas, not his real name. He worked at Treasury, dealt with debt management, knew the numbers, understood the math, and around 2021, he realized the debt was unsolvable through conventional means. Thomas ran models, tested scenarios, growth rates, tax increases, spending cuts, every combination. The math didn't work. The debt was growing too fast. Interest rates were rising. The gap was widening. Default or devaluation were the only options. And default wasn't really an option. So Thomas started researching alternatives, unconventional solutions, things that seemed crazy but might actually work. And he found the 1933 gold confiscation, studied it, realized it could be repeated, with modifications, with Bitcoin included. He wrote a memo, not recommending it, just analyzing it, showing it was possible, showing the legal framework, the historical precedent, the potential scale. That memo circulated through Treasury, through the Fed, through certain congressional committees. Thomas left government in 2023. He won't talk publicly, signed NDAs, faces legal consequences if he speaks. But he told a friend, someone I know, one thing before going silent. It's not a question of if, it's when. And most people won't see it coming until it's done. But here's what even the insiders don't fully understand. Here's the twist that makes this more complicated than simple confiscation. The crypto gold trick isn't just about solving US debt. It's about resetting the global financial system and replacing the dollar as reserve currency with something the US controls even more completely. Right now, the dollar is the global reserve currency, but it's being challenged by China, by BRICS, by countries tired of US economic dominance. They're trying to create alternatives. Gold-backed currencies, digital yuan, anything to reduce dollar dependence. The US can't stop this through force, can't prevent de-dollarization through military power, can only prevent it through financial innovation, by creating something better than the dollar, something nations want to use, something that gives the US even more control than the current system. Enter the digital dollar, not just CBDC, central bank digital currency, but gold-backed and Bitcoin-backed digital dollar, a currency tied to real assets. That combines benefits of gold standard, hard money, limited supply, with benefits of digital currency, speed, programmability, control. Here's how it works. The US revalues its gold to market prices, acquires massive Bitcoin reserves, then issues new digital dollars backed by these assets. One digital dollar equals X amount of gold plus Y amount of Bitcoin. The backing is transparent, verifiable on blockchain, trustworthy. Other nations see this, see the US dollar backed by real assets again, like Bretton Woods, but better. Digital, modern. They adopt it. Because the alternative, Chinese digital yuan, BRICS currency, isn't as attractive. The US maintains reserve currency status, but with even more control. Because digital dollars are programmable, traceable, controllable. And here's the dark part. The government can now see every transaction, block transactions they don't like, freeze accounts instantly, impose negative interest rates, tax directly from accounts. The control is total, absolute, unprecedented. This isn't speculation. This is what's being planned. In meetings between Treasury, the Fed, Pentagon, and Silicon Valley, the technical capability exists. The political will is building. The crisis that enables implementation is inevitable. The crypto gold trick isn't just about debt. It's about power, about creating financial infrastructure where government control is absolute, where privacy is gone, where resistance is impossible, where every economic transaction is monitored, approved, and taxable in real time. And the beautiful part, from the government's perspective, is that people will accept it. Because it'll be presented as solution to debt crisis, to inflation, to financial instability, as the way to save the dollar, to prevent collapse, to protect the economy. And people will opt in, will surrender freedom for security, just like they always do during crisis. So what happens to your wealth, your savings, your assets? When the crypto gold trick is implemented, if you hold dollars, they devalue immediately. By how much? Depends on the revaluation scale. If gold goes from $42,000 to $10,000 in government accounting, that's a 238-fold increase in gold's dollar price, which means the dollar lost 99.6% of its gold-backed value. Your savings? Decimated. If you hold gold. Depends on where. Physical gold stored privately might be confiscated, like 1933, or might not. Enforcement is difficult with hidden gold, but if stored in banks, ETFs, allocated accounts, it's registered, traceable, confiscatable. You'll receive dollars at fair market value, which won't compensate for subsequent dollar devaluation. If you hold Bitcoin, centralized exchanges will freeze accounts, comply with government seizure orders. Self-custody wallets might escape. If you moved assets before the order, if you never linked identity to addresses, if you can prove you lost your keys. But enforcement will be aggressive. Tax audits for anyone who sold Bitcoin. Can't explain the proceeds. Presumes confiscation evasion. If you hold stocks, they might appreciate in nominal terms. As dollar devalues, asset prices inflate. But in real terms, purchasing power, you might lose. Depends on the scale of devaluation. Depends on how quickly wages adjust. Depends on capital controls and market interventions. If you hold real estate, similar to stocks, nominal price increase, real value uncertain. But property taxes will rise. Maintenance costs will increase. If you have mortgage, that debt becomes easier to pay. But if you own outright, you bear full cost of devaluation through lost purchasing power. The bottom line, there's no perfect protection, because the system is designed to capture wealth everywhere. That's the point. The government needs to reduce debt burden, and that requires reducing private wealth. The methods are sophisticated, but the goal is simple: transfer. Some people think they can escape, move money offshore, buy foreign assets, renounce citizenship. But capital controls can prevent transfers, foreign assets can be sanctioned, and renunciation makes you a target, a declared enemy of the state, subject to enhanced scrutiny and penalties. The system is comprehensive, the trap is total. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's too late to move. $37 trillion in debt, growing by $2 trillion per year, interest payments exceeding $1 trillion annually. The math doesn't work. The debt is unsolvable through conventional means. Everyone in Washington knows it, and they're preparing the escape hatch, the crypto gold trick. Confiscate Bitcoin. Revalue gold. Create wealth on government balance sheet. Devalue the dollar. Transfer debt burden from government to citizens. Solve the crisis at your expense. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's financial history. It happened in 1933. It worked. It solved the debt crisis. It saved the dollar. And it can happen again. The legal framework exists. The historical precedent exists. The political will is building. The crisis that enables implementation is inevitable. James Rickards has been warning for years. Pentagon War Games tested the scenario. Treasury economists have analyzed the mechanics. The memo has circulated. The legislation is being drafted. The infrastructure is being built. And most people have no idea. Because it's being done quietly, through boring regulatory changes, technical adjustments, incremental preparation, until one Friday night, during a crisis. When people are scared. When alternatives seem worse. When resistance is lowest. The executive order will be signed. Bitcoin nationalized. Gold revalued. Dollar devalued. And your wealth transferred. You won't have time to react. Won't have time to move assets. Won't have time to protect yourself. Because that's the point. Surprise is essential. Speed is critical. The wealth transfer must happen before people can escape. Before resistance can organize. Before the trick is exposed. This is what Washington is hiding. The plan to solve debt through the greatest wealth transfer in history. The crypto gold trick that makes $37 trillion in debt manageable, payable, gone. By making your dollars worth less, your savings worth less, your future worth less. And when it happens, they'll call it necessary, patriotic. The only way to save the economy. The only alternative to collapse. And most people will accept it. Because they're scared. Because they trust authority. Because they don't understand what happened until it's over. The debt crisis is coming. The solution is already planned. The infrastructure is being built. And unless you understand what's happening, you'll be caught in the trap. When the crypto gold trick is sprung, and 37 trillion in debt disappears, along with a significant portion of your wealth, the question isn't whether it'll happen. History suggests it will. The question is whether you'll see it coming, whether you'll understand the signs, whether you'll protect yourself before it's too late. Washington is hiding the plan, but the signs are visible. For those who know what to look for those who understand history, for those who won't be caught surprised when the trick is finally revealed. The crypto gold trick is coming. The wealth transfer is inevitable. The only question is, will you be prepared, or will you wake up one morning to discover your wealth has been transferred? To solve a debt crisis you didn't create? The clock is ticking. The trap is being set, and time is running out.